With this blues soloing guitar lesson, we'll show how to solo the blues with an extended diagonal box pattern, along with fretboard diagrams, practice jam rhythm tracks, and song examples from Jimi Hendrix, Led Zeppelin, and Eric Clapton. We're covering it all with the step-by-step approach. With our previous lessons from our blues soloing playlist, we introduced how to construct the blues scale from scratch to cover the complete fretboard. And once you have this complete pattern, the next step is to learn how to navigate or solo within the pattern. And there are a lot of approaches you can use to do this, but the best approach is to focus on one section or box pattern at a time. With the diagonal blues box pattern, you can learn how to solo outside of the standard blues box pattern to other areas of the fretboard using a diagonal approach. And what I mean by a diagonal approach is a lot of times when you first learn to solo with the blues, you learned a standard blues box pattern going across the 6 strings. You may learn some riffs with that as well, but either way, it's a horizontal approach going up and down the 6 strings. Well, once you want to extend things and go outside that standard box pattern, the other connected blues box patterns, if you apply a horizontal approach, they really don't fit the hand as well as the diagonal approach does. And what we did with the lesson or level just before this one is we took that first step with learning the diagonal approach with a basic diagonal pattern. With this lesson, we're going to extend that diagonal pattern. We're going to learn some new riffs and also show you some song examples as well. We're going to start by learning 3 new blues riffs within the diagonal box pattern in the key of E blues. And we're going to then play those 3 riffs along with a backing rhythm track. So starting with riff number 1. Riff number 1 follows the initial diagonal approach that we introduced from the previous lesson. And we're going to start on that bottom string, the 6th string, 5th fret. And riff 1 begins with a hammer from 5 to 7. You'll note the curve between the 5 and the 7 indicates to hammer, meaning you pluck the 5th fret, but you don't pluck the 7th fret, but it's still sounded. And then we're going to move along the initial diagonal approach, which is a bunch of 5/7s. What I mean by that is bottom string, hammer 5 to 7, then go to the 5th string, 5/7, go to the 4th string, 5/7. So we'll put that together. Pluck that 7th fret again and slide to 9. That's what the slash indicates on the tab. So we're going to start with that slide again from the 7th to the 9th fret, and then you'll see we go to the 3rd string, 7, 9 to end riff 1. I'm going to do that slide again. Dun, 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 and we'll do it again. Let's put it together from the beginning. We'll play it 3 times. We'll gradually build up the speed. 1, 2, ready, go. 1, 2, ready, go. 1, 2, ready, go. One thing you'll note is the root note focus to end the riff. Again, we're in the key of E blues. The riff doesn't necessarily start on an E root note, but it ends on one. And it's good phrasing to let that note ring or sustain. You can even, if you want, throw a little bit of vibrato on it as well. For riff 2, we're going to go into the extended portion of the diagonal box pattern. And the best way to get there is to start with riff 1 and get to that last note. That 3rd string, 9th fret E root note. Now from here, we're going to apply something I call a pivot maneuver to go into the extended portion of the diagonal box pattern. What I mean by that is we're going to take the fretting hand and slightly shift up and over 1 string and 1 fret. So right now we're aligned along the 7th fret, 7, 9. We're going to move that first finger up and over to the 2nd string, 8th fret, because we want to keep using the stronger 1st and 3rd fingers. If you made it this far into the lesson, I'll give you the secret regarding the diagonal approach. It's primarily using your 1 and 3 fingers. Why? Because they're stronger fingers, and your 1 and 3 fingers, the stronger fingers, are better to help facilitate bending, and vibrato. So let's go and start riff 2 now. We got that 7/9. Let's pivot now to that second string 8th fret. Riff 2 begins with a whole step, 8 to 10 on that second string. And here we go with the bending and vibrato. Next, we're going to apply a bend to that same 10th fret on the second string. Because our third finger is now there instead of our pinky. If we didn't pivot, if we just did the standard horizontal approach, they would suggest to use the pinky. We're going to use our stronger third finger. And now we've got our 1 and 3 fingers for extra support. We can have a good bend. Multiple fingers gives you better sustain and better control over the bend. So with that, let's start the riff now from the beginning. 8, 10, and you bend that 10th fret, and you're going to sustain that bend. And with your pinky finger, and again, we sort of stopped it as we're showing, but that pinky finger is going to fret the first string 10th fret as well. And then there's going to be a reverse bend after that. And if you look at the tab, you'll see the 10 with the arrow and then the curve and then the 10 in parentheses, because we pluck that 10 on the release, but we don't pluck that note again, but we sound it at the regular or normal 10th fret without it being bent. Let's put it together again. We'll piece this together from the beginning. 8, 10, bend the 10th fret, sustain it, top string with the pinky, and then the release. And then on that same string, we're going to kind of go back down the pattern, first finger, 8th fret, and then down to the third string, 9th fret. Middle finger on that. And you can also, if you have your middle finger there, it should be in position. You can apply a little bit of vibrato on that, because here we go again with phrasing technique. We're ending on that E root note again for riff 2. Now let's piece together riff 2. Let's do 3 in a row. Again, we'll gradually build up the speed. 1, 2, ready, go. One, two, ready, go. And one more. 1, 2, ready, go. For riff 3, we're going to apply another pivot maneuver, but this time it'll be with the opposite effect. We're going to be shifting back down or back to the original diagonal box pattern. So here's what I mean. If we get to that last note from riff 2, again we're on that root note. Well, to help facilitate bending and vibrato with the 1 and 3 fingers, if we're going to go back to our original pattern, we slightly pivot the finger. If you see that, we have the middle finger there as we're in the extended portion of the diagonal box pattern. If we go back to the original, we want to place our third finger there, and then here is riff 3. Again, we got our 1 and 3 fingers in position. As we go back down to the original 3 strings along the 5th and 7th fret positions. Now we did this riff as well with the previous lesson, but again, the idea here is taking the initial diagonal box pattern, extending it, and getting acclimated to connecting everything. So let's play riff 3 on its own 3 times in a row. We're starting on that root note, the, again, 3rd string, 9th fret. Here we go from the top. 1, 2, ready, go. And we did this in the previous lesson, but if this is the first time you play this riff, again there's somewhat of a pivot maneuver here. Note the root note focus on, this time, the E root note on the 5th string, 7th fret, but what we're doing is sliding up to the root, which again requires a slight maneuver, a slight pivot of the fretting hand. All right, let's put together riff 3 again. Again, 3rd string, 9th fret. 1, 2, ready, go. And we'll do that one more time. 1, 2, ready, go. For the next step, we're going to prepare to jam along with the backing rhythm track, and we're going to do so by combining all three riffs. So it's a good idea at this point to rehearse those riffs by combining them all together. So we're going to try to play riff 1, riff 2, and riff 3 in succession. And let's rehearse that right now. Here is riff 1. Pivoting to riff 2. Then the pivot maneuver for riff 3. Let's do that combined riff again. 1, 2, ready, go. And one more. 1, 2, ready, go. Now that we have all three blues riffs memorized, the next step is to hear how they sound along with a backing rhythm track. And that'll be coming up in the next clip. And the objective is to simply play the combination we rehearsed, riff 1, riff 2, and riff 3, along with the backing rhythm. It sounds easy enough, but if you haven't done a lot of jamming along with the backing rhythm track, especially if you just learned a riff, sometimes that backing rhythm can throw off your concentration. So what we're going to do in the next clip is you really don't have to worry about timing too much. You just want to play the riffs correct and with clarity, but we're also going to have a guide video. It'll be myself playing the three riff combinations, so all you have to do is see if you can keep up with the guide solo video, and then it'll be mission accomplished. If you can keep up with the track, then you'll be ready for some variations that we'll throw in later this lesson. And another note is you're going to be able to go through the three riff combination twice. So the running order will be riff 1, riff 2, riff 3, and then repeat riff 1, riff 2, and then the track will end with the third riff. And again, if you can keep up with the video, you'll be ready for the next challenge, which will be variations. Next, we're going to apply variations to the riffs we just covered. And what variations do is they act as sort of a stepping stone to being more creative with soloing or playing riffs within this diagonal box pattern. In other words, variations are sort of that middle ground between learning a riff and being able to come up with your own riffs or improvising. And what we're going to do is we're going to focus more on the extended portion of the pattern, based on that riff number 2 that we covered. So we're going to set ourselves up here. We're going to sort of climb up the basic pattern. We're going to go to that extended portion. Again, the riffs we're going to apply variations to are going to be from originally what was riff number 2. Now, an example of a variation here is, what if we did this? What if we started at the same bend here, but on the bend here, the release bend, what if we did a bend and release instead? In other words, we're sounding 3 notes, but only plucking one note, that bent note that's already bent. releasing down to the 10th fret, and having that first finger sort of anchored on the 2nd string 8th fret. If you haven't done this before, it'll be a little bit tricky. But if you can get 3 different notes to sound, and then here's another variation, a little back and forth between the root and the 2nd string. Backing up a little bit more. Let's do that again. And if we back it up another step, the beginning of what was initially riff number 2. Let's do that variation again. Staying on that same root note, here's another variation. If you could just sort of follow along, get those familiar with these 3 notes here. In fact, if we could do this, now we're going to gradually add some stuff to this. That was a hammer pull-off. What we're going to do is pluck that note, and then between the 8th and the 10th fret, a hammer pull-off. And then we're going to repeat that. We're going to get a speed effect going here like this. And how we do that is, again, this is the basic idea, but 2 points on this riff. You keep the first finger anchored on that 2nd string 8th fret. And then with the plucking hand, the strumming hand, you're going to kind of drag across between the 3rd and the 2nd strings like so. And that helps with the speed effect. And you'll hear variations of this riff in all kinds of blues and rock solos. But again, that's another variation based off the pattern we just learned that was from riff number 2. And then the other variation. Now, copying these riffs verbatim, these variations verbatim, that helps, but another thing you could do is keep in mind you already know what notes to play here. You could, any variations that you can apply, whether it's a 1 or 2 note, you got these 3 notes to kind of do all kinds of tricks on your own. And I would suggest to try that also on your own, is to make up your own variations just with these 3 notes. With variations, you can not only add or delete notes from a standard riff that you learn, you can also add in some blues technique to a riff. In this clip, we're going to focus on double stops. And we're going to still be within this extended portion of the diagonal pattern with that 3rd string, 9th fret, the root with the middle finger and our first finger. If you could follow me here, we should be familiar enough now where we can copy this. And then let's build on this. Let's do that again. Just getting familiar with these notes and now doing this. Again, hopefully you're following along and copying, because here's what we're going to do now. We're just connecting 2 strings, playing them together, the double stop effect between that root, the E note on that 3rd string 9th fret, and that 2nd string 8th fret. You can even slide up to the double stop. Another thing, if you kind of look, again, that's where visualizing the box pattern also helps with being creative. We see these 2 notes are part of it, but if you were to take your 3rd finger and place it down on the 2nd string 10th fret, you could lift the first finger off. Another double stop riff right there. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And then going back to the original. Again, getting familiar with the box pattern. We learn a standard riff to start, and then once you know the pattern, you try one variation, then another, and it just keeps building to next thing you know, muscle memory kicks in, and you're comfortable playing the pattern, and it's going to help you be a little bit more creative with making up your own riffs down the road. Another blues technique you can apply to a variation is adding passing tones to blues riffs. And passing tones are not part of a particular scale. They are outside of a scale, but they're extra notes that you can add in to get a certain effect. And when it comes to playing the blues, the passing tones create sort of an off-center kind of feel. And the deal with passing tones is that you can throw them in anywhere in between a whole step. As it turns out, with the diagonal box pattern, everything is a whole step. 5/7, whole step, whole step, whole step. Even though we slid from the 7th to the 5th frets, that is a whole step. Another whole step on that 7/9, 7/9, and then as we pivoted up, 8 to 10, another whole step. Well, you can throw in a passing tone in between all of those whole steps, and that's just with the second middle finger. It kind of slows things up as to if you didn't play with the passing, sort of a stutter step kind of effect. And you can do that everywhere within this extended diagonal pattern. Now, there could be certain riffs we could break down, but I think you get the point. The idea is with variations, again, throw in some passing tones. The point is to try them out on your own, come up with your own riffs. Should be pretty easy. Just throw in that second middle finger note and you're playing a passing tone riff. Now, once you become reasonably comfortable playing this diagonal box pattern, it's time to go back to the original standard box patterns and to start focusing on shifting between the two. And here's what I mean. With our example here being in E blues, we have our standard E blues box pattern along the open fret position. We can also play the same box pattern 12 frets higher, because on guitar everything repeats every 12 frets. We also have E, same box pattern along the 12th fret position. Well, in between those, we now have our extended diagonal approach here. And if the diagonal approach is, if you're new to this, it's actually a little bit trickier than you think, especially when it's time to play along with the backing rhythm, to shift between the two. And one suggestion I would make is to get your bearings down before you jam. In other words, if we're playing an E, which we're going to do in 2 clips, we have an extended backing rhythm track. Before the jam starts, you say to yourself, okay, open position, standard box pattern, diagonal at the 5th fret, and another standard box pattern at the 12th fret. You get your bearings down on what fret positions you know how to solo off of, and that'll help be a little bit less mistakes. You're less likely to go out of key when you actually start to jam along with backing rhythm tracks. Now, when trying out your own variations, you still want to focus on good phrasing technique. In other words, you want to focus on your root notes, beginning and ending your riffs on the root note. In this case, if we're in E blues, that's focusing on the E notes. It's not a rule that you have to always do that for every riff, but early on, it is a good idea to phrase around E root notes. In fact, just about everything we've done with these riffs with the diagonal approach, there was a root note focus. Root note there with E, another E root note. Well, that riff didn't begin on a root note, but it ended on one. And even on the pivot maneuver, we began on an E root note, and we ended on an E root note. And again, it's not a rule that you have to do that all the time. But if you focus on this basic idea of phrasing, focusing on the root note, that's going to help for more advanced blues playing later on, because there's a lot more to it when it comes to phrasing. So by having a root note focus when you're coming up with your own riffs, it's going to help you just sound a little bit more cohesive, a little less rambling when you start jamming along with backing rhythms. Now, at this point in the lesson, we have a lot more options when it comes to jamming along with a backing rhythm track. So with the next clip, we're going to have an extended backing rhythm track in E blues that will go for 3 full verses. And not only that, we're going to remove the guide solo track. That way you can hear how your own variations will sound or harmonize with the backing rhythm. And by trying out these variations, this is sort of to push you in the direction of eventually being able to improvise with riffs. You will most likely make a lot of mistakes. No worries with that. The whole point is to kind of push yourself a little bit, and eventually what will happen will be a happy accident. And what I mean by that is you're going to play a riff, maybe make up your own variation, and at some point in the progression, a particular riff is going to sound really good along with a particular chord. It's not pre-planned, but it sounds good at the moment. A lot of times you'll recognize it while you're playing, or maybe you'll be recording yourself, but that's the whole point, is to kind of push yourself a little bit, hear how things sort of land in place, especially if you stay within the scale. And that's to help you become eventually more creative and help you improvise. So with that next clip, we'll keep the graphic up to give you reminders on what options you have to solo. But again, the whole point is just go for it, try out some variations, and eventually that's going to lead to you being more creative in making up your own riffs. This diagonal box pattern is movable, meaning you can shift the same pattern up or down the fretboard to play in different keys. Now if we have E blues as our home base, that was along the 5th fret position. Now keep in mind this is not an E root note, the first note. Our root note is on that 5th string. So as long as you know the letter note, that note on the 5th string, that's what key you are in, and then you can just play the diagonal box pattern around that. So if we were to move up 1 fret, we would be in the key of F blues. Everything's the same, just a different key. And again, memorizing that 5th fret is probably the proper technical way to do it, but as sort of a shortcut, since we were focused so much on E to start this lesson, by now you may know, well, the E diagonal is along the 5th fret position. Even though that's not an E, you can just say E, F, and know that you're in the key of F, and that's the root note. Going the opposite direction, if we were to go down the fretboard, say to D blues, well, we have, again, E is our starting point here. E, E flat, D. There's our root note. The diagonal pattern will be based around that. So here's that's the extended approach applied to D blues. If we were to do the key of A blues, for example, well, it would be higher up, not lower, and here's what I mean. We have E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, A. We're up at that 12th fret, at least with the root. So not only is the diagonal approach or the diagonal box pattern movable, you can apply it to any key. Another challenge will be to focus on shifting patterns like we did in E earlier, shifting patterns with these different keys. In A, for example, it's almost a sort of opposite effect. With the E diagonal being along the 5th fret, well, if we were to shift everything to A blues, the standard box pattern in A happens to be along the 5th fret. We we have the box pattern or the diagonal box pattern for A that we just covered now along the 10th fret. So in this case, if we were to shift playing an A blues, that's what we would be doing here, shifting between the box patterns. Another note regarding shifting between box patterns, sort of a general rule that you can apply, is that from the standard box pattern, which most people initially learn, the diagonal approach or the diagonal box pattern will either be 5 frets higher from the root note or 7 frets lower. It really depends on the key. Every key presents a different way of positioning on the fretboard. So with E, for example, the open E, 0 plus 5, there we are in our 5th fret position. Standard box pattern in A, we go up to the 10th fret position. Now if we were in C blues, the standard box pattern is along the 8th fret position. We're going up 5 frets there a little too high, but we can go 7 frets lower from the 8th fret. So the standard blues box pattern in C, the diagonal approach, or the diagonal box pattern in C, 8 minus 7, 1st fret. There is the C blues using the diagonal approach. Now the diagonal approach has been applied to many classic rock and blues solos and riffs. One example being Purple Haze by Jimi Hendrix, which is in E blues. Now we already know E blues along that 5th fret position, at least starting with that diagonal approach. The opening riff to Purple Haze, a little unusual, but if you actually broke it down, knowing now that it's in E blues, you'll see that all these notes fit within the diagonal box pattern. Then the next riff, still primarily within that E blues diagonal box pattern, 5-7, 5-7, 5-7. We have a little open note here, the open bottom string E, which makes total sense, just outside of the pattern. Then repeating everything. I'm not going to play it note for note, but that next section or riff, again, we're within that E diagonal box pattern. And then back to here. Again, we've already played riffs within this pattern, and most notably the ending. There's, again, the root note focus landing on the E root note on that 3rd string 9th fret, but also staying within this diagonal box pattern. Another song example would be Stairway to Heaven by Led Zeppelin. Stairway to Heaven is in the key of A minor. The solo is based primarily from the A blues scale, with the first few sections being played along the 5th fret position using the standard box pattern. But as the solo progresses, there is an ascending riff, and if you recall earlier when we talked about the A diagonal box pattern, 5 frets higher from our standard root note, that would be along the 10th fret. Well, right in Stairway to Heaven, there is a section. Again, if you've heard the solo, you're very familiar with this. It's played 10 consecutive times. Well, this riff is right smack dab in the middle of that diagonal box pattern. It's just a variation, very much like we did earlier when we were in E, with that sort of 3-note combination. Same 3-note combination, just shifted up 5 frets in A and some variations with the bending. So if you've copied this riff, now you know what pattern he's playing. If you're about to learn the Stairway to Heaven solo, again, knowing the pattern that he's following simply makes it easier to learn and copy. And eventually, if you like that sound, you can come up with your own riffs now that you know what pattern and key is being used. Layla by Eric Clapton is in the key of D blues, and on the unplugged acoustic version, the opening solo features riffs based from this diagonal approach in D. Now he does throw in some extra notes, but again, we're going to be in that extended sort of diagonal approach in D, and he throws in some extra notes there. But again, if you've learned Layla or are about to learn it, if you visualize the key of D blues, you're going to see how he came up with some of those riffs. So there are 3 examples right there, where hopefully you'll see now this diagonal approach comes in handy. If you got Purple Haze, Stairway to Heaven, and Layla, it might be worth looking into for your own riffs down the road. Once you have this lesson down, the next step is to focus on other areas of the fretboard by learning new box patterns and riffs. You can also focus on more advanced phrasing and timing techniques as well. And you can check out my blues soloing guitar lessons playlist for additional lessons. And for new video releases, you can subscribe to Paluzzi Guitar.